Garvell had been reading casualty numbers for 3 hours. His 8 eyes moved across the data screen slowly, the way a person moves when they already know what the numbers say and are only reading them again to be sure. The chamber was full. Every seat at the long deliberation table was taken. Representatives from 5 species sat under the cold white light, and none of them were talking, because the numbers on Garvell's screen had taken all the words out of the room. He read the last figure aloud. Silence. Then one of the Murith delegates made a low clicking sound with the back of his throat. It was the Murith version of a sigh. Garvell had heard it many times over 40 years of council work. He had never gotten used to it. 14 cycles, Garvell said. He set the data tablet down. If the Raleth continue their current push rate on the eastern frontier, the convergence will lose the Careth systems in 14 cycles. After that, the frontier collapses in sections. We have no force available to stop sequential collapse. More silence. It was a particular kind of silence. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say. The silence of people who had already said everything and had reached the edge of what words could do. Councillor Peth, the eldest of the Valhari delegation, pressed 3 of her fingers together in the gesture that meant she wanted to speak. Garvell nodded a hear. We have reviewed every allied species, she said. Her voice was steady and dry. The Murith cannot reinforce in time. The Valhari 7th Fleet is already engaged at the Northern Arc. The Dorith have given everything they have to give. She paused. There is no one left to call. Garvell said nothing. She was right. At the far end of the table, a young archivist named Kale sat with a data screen and a stylus and the particular posture of someone who wanted to speak but was not sure if what he had to say was worth the interruption. He was 23 years old. He had been assigned to the deliberation chamber 4 months ago. He had spent those 4 months being very quiet. He raised his stylus. Garvell looked at him. There is a procedural flag, Kale said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. He cleared his throat. In the species catalogue. Section 48. Nobody at the table looked at him. Garvell looked at him only because it was his job to look at whoever spoke. The catalogue has 47 registered spacefaring species, Garvell said. 47 active registrations, Kale said. There is a 48th entry. It was filed 300 cycles ago. A long-range survey drone passed through an unremarkable system in the outer western band. Single inhabited world. 1 moon. Mostly water. He turned his data screen so Garvell could see it, though Garvell was too far away to read it. The entry is marked as dormant. Pre-spaceflight civilization. The survey drone assessed probable extinction risk due to internal conflict. The file was flagged for periodic review and then, Kale looked at the screen. The periodic review was never scheduled. Garvell picked up the data tablet again. He pulled the file without standing up. He looked at it for 4 seconds. A blurry image of a blue-green world, taken from deep range, the colors bleeding into each other like something left out in rain. A string of spectrographic data below it. And a name, in the Convergence's oldest cataloging script. Terran. Human. This file is 300 cycles old, Garvell said. Yes. The species was assessed as pre-spaceflight. Yes. And probable extinction. Kale's stylus tapped once against his data screen. The extinction assessment was a projection. It was never confirmed. Garvell looked at the blurry blue-green world for 1 more second. Then he closed the file. A ghost record, he said. We do not plan wars around ghost records. He set the tablet down. The council moved on. They discussed withdrawal plans. Defensive postures. How far back the eastern line could pull before the math became unrecoverable. Peth proposed a staged retreat that would cost 3 inhabited systems but save the core network. Another delegate countered with a proposal that cost 5 systems but held 2 of them longer. A third proposal involved sacrificing the Careth moons entirely and consolidating around the inner arc. Garvell listened to all of it. He offered analysis where analysis was needed. He kept his voice level. The math was the math. They were going to lose. Not today. Not in 1 moment. In the slow, grinding way that things fall apart when they run out of options one at a time. The session ended after another 2 hours. The delegates filed out. Garvell stayed behind to review the session transcripts, which was his habit, and because going back to his quarters meant sitting with the casualty numbers in a smaller room, which was not something he wanted to do. At the far end of the table, Kale had not left. He was still sitting in his chair with his data screen, and he was looking at something on it. Garvel watched him without meaning to. Kale had the expression of a person doing a thing that probably did not matter but could not stop themselves from doing anyway. Garvel crossed the chamber. He looked at the screen in Kale's hands. The blurry blue-green world. Kale looked up. He did not look embarrassed. He looked like someone standing very still at the edge of something. It was never confirmed, Kale said again. Not as an argument. Just as a thing he needed to say out loud. Garvel looked at the image. The light in it. The way the clouds moved across the surface in spirals, frozen in the moment the survey drone had passed. Something alive had made those clouds, or something alive had breathed the air under them, once, 300 cycles ago. Maybe more than once. Maybe still. Probably not. He straightened. File it properly, he said. Give the review a scheduled date. That is good archival practice. He left. In the corridor outside the chamber, he walked toward his office and passed 2 junior staff members discussing dinner. He passed a Valhari security officer on her evening round. He passed a window that looked out at the station's exterior dock, where 3 convergent ships sat dark and quiet in the cold. He stopped at the window. 14 cycles. The math did not change. There was no 48 species that had somehow developed faster than light travel in secret and was waiting to be asked. There was no cavalry. There was a catalogue, and the catalogue had 47 entries, and none of them were enough. The window gave back his own reflection, all 8 eyes and the weight behind them. He walked on. In the archive room, Kale sat alone with the blurry image of a world that might be dead and might be something else. He read the old spectrographic data 3 times. He read the survey drone's automated assessment notes. He looked at the extinction projection, which was exactly that, a projection, 300 years cold, made by a machine passing through at speed with no time to look properly. He put his stylus down. He did not go to sleep for a long time. The line broke at 0300. Garvel was on the command deck of the convergence vessel Ardent Measure when it happened. He watched the tactical display. He watched the blue markers that represented the eastern defensive positions go dark in sequence, one after the other, like someone walking down a hallway and turning off the lights. It was not a surprise. That was the worst part. It was not a surprise at all. Picket Station 7 has gone silent, his comms officer said. Garvel said nothing. Station 9. 11. A pause. 14 is not responding. The Ralith assault fleet had come through the gap in the Kareth perimeter the way water comes through a crack hull, first a trickle, then a flood, then the hull is just gone. Their ships were enormous. They did not fight with elegance. They fought with size and repetition, the same way a tide does, until the thing they were pushing against simply stopped existing. Order remaining picket stations to fall back to secondary positions, Garvel said. Get me a count of surviving vessels. 17 confirmed surviving, sir. 4 more unaccounted. 17. From a defensive group of 41. He did not allow himself to feel the shape of that number. Not now. He put it in the same place he put all the other numbers from the last 3 months, the place behind his third eye that had gotten very full lately. Sir. His scanner officer's voice changed in a way that made Garvel look up. There is something on long range. Raleth reinforcement. No. A pause. Longer than scanner readings required. The system is not classifying it. Garvel crossed the deck in 4 steps. He looked at the scanner display himself. The system was trying. He could see it running identification checks against the known registry in real time. Murith profile, no. Valhari configuration, no. Dorat Hu geometry, no. It went through all 47 entries in the catalogue. It went through them again. It kept flagging the contacts as unidentified and running the check again, the machine equivalent of blinking. 11 vessels. Coming in fast. Dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a tight group, perfect spacing, which meant whoever was flying them was very good or had been doing it for a long time or both. They did not look like anything Garvel had ever seen. They were angular. Asymmetrical in a way that seemed intentional, like they had been built to be harder to read at a distance. No visible energy signatures matching known weapon systems. No markings in any registry script. They came out of the jump between the Ardent Measure and the Ralith assault fleet. directly between. "Sir," said his tactical officer, in the voice of someone who was not sure what question to ask first. Garvel held up one hand. Watching. The 11 vessels opened fire. He had been in combat for 20 years. He had seen the Murith fight, and the Valhari, and 2 minor species that no longer existed. He thought he had a reasonable understanding of what combat looked like. It did not look like this. The unknown ships did not pick a target and focus. They split. Each vessel took an angle that the others left open, covering the full sphere of the R'lyeh formation, and they move the way things move when they are not afraid of being hit, not recklessly, but with a specific kind of calm aggression, taking ground rather than avoiding fire. The R'lyeh adjusted. The unknown ships adjusted faster. 2 R'lyeh cruisers were gone before Garvel's tactical officer had finished typing the first damage assessment. "They are not using any weapon type in our registry," the tactical officer said. "I can see that. Hull configurations do not match any known species." "I can see that too." A 3rd R'lyeh cruiser broke apart. The debris field it left behind was used, almost immediately, as cover by one of the unknown vessels swinging wide on a flanking angle. Garvel watched that. He watched it for a long moment. Whoever they were, they thought while they moved. That was not common. The emergency comms panel lit up. A hail, coming in on the Convergence's standard emergency frequency. Audio only. No visual feed. Garvel's comms officer looked at him. He nodded. The voice that came through the speaker was unlike anything the translation system had ever processed. It had the comms officer's panel working visibly to keep up. The sound of it was strange, lower than Murith, more varied than Dorith, moving through tones that the Convergence's known language archive had no framework for. But the translation came through, rough and slightly delayed and perfectly clear. "Convergence Command, this is Admiral Iris Vance, Earth Carrier Strike Group 7. We heard you needed help. Sorry we are late. We had to find you first." The bridge was very quiet. Garvel's comms officer looked at him again. He said, without looking away from the scanner display, "Get me Kale." Kale arrived on the bridge 4 minutes later at a run, which was how Garvel knew he had already been awake. He stopped inside the door. He looked at the tactical display. He looked at the 11 unregistered vessels tearing through a R'lyeh assault fleet that was supposed to be unstoppable. He looked at the scanner readouts still cycling through the empty registry. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Garvel watched the battle. The R'lyeh were falling back now, not rooting, not yet, but recalculating. They were not used to recalculating. They were used to being the thing other species recalculated for. The shift in them was visible even on a scanner display, the formation pulling inward the way a fist closes. It did not help. The 11 ships followed. "Who are they?" the tactical officer asked. She was not asking Garvel. She was asking the room, the scanner, the universe. Garvel answered anyway. "Terran," he said. The word sat strange in his mouth. 300 years old. Human. On the scanner, a 4th R'lyeh cruiser went dark. Garvel's scanner officer, without being asked, pulled the archive file on her secondary screen. The blurry blue-green world. The old spectrographic data. The extinction projection, 300 years cold. She looked at the battle outside. She looked at the image. She closed the file, slowly, carefully, like setting down something that had suddenly turned out to be much heavier than it looked. Outside, the R'lyeh assault fleet, which had broken a 41-ship defensive line in 6 hours, pulled back. The 11 unknown vessels did not pursue beyond the system edge. They held their position. They waited. The emergency frequency opened again. Iris Vance's voice, through the translator, steady and unhurried. "Convergence Command. We have the field. Advise on your wounded ships. We can provide assist." Garvel stood on his bridge and breathed. 17 surviving vessels, 3 of them badly damaged, a broken defensive line, a R'lyeh fleet that had just been made to think twice about something for what was possibly the first time in its military history, and 11 ships from a ghost record, holding the gap, asking if anyone needed help. He pressed the comms panel. "This is Garvel, Senior Arbiter, Convergence Command Vessel Ardent Measure." He paused. The translator worked. "We accept your assist." And another pause, because the next words were not in any official script he had been trained to use. "Thank you." A brief silence on the channel. Then Iris Vance said, "Don't mention it." Somewhere behind Garvel, Kale sat down in an unoccupied chair, very quietly, and put his face in his hands, and did not make a single sound. Thinking, the meeting room on the human ship was nothing like Garvel had expected. He had not known what to expect. That was its own problem. In 40 years of convergence diplomatic work, he had always had a file. Background, cultural norms, table arrangements, what not to do with your hands. The file on humans was 300 years old and said they were probably dead. He had arrived at this meeting with almost nothing, which was a feeling he did not enjoy and did not know well. The room was plain. A table. Chairs built for a body type he was still adjusting to. 2 arms, 2 legs, spine straight up the middle, the whole arrangement somehow stable. A light overhead that was slightly too warm and slightly too yellow. And on a small surface near the wall, a metal container with something hot and brown inside it that smelled like burned wood and old earth. Garvel's translation system had no word for it. One of his aides identified it later as coffee. He filed that away. Admiral Iris Vance was already seated when he arrived. She stood when he entered, which he understood was a greeting gesture. She was shorter than he had expected. Her face was the kind of face that gave nothing away unless it chose to. She had lines around her eyes and a steadiness in how she held herself that Garvel associated, across all species, with people who had been in very bad situations and come out the other side still functional. She poured herself coffee. She did not offer him any. He appreciated that. It meant she was paying attention. Vera Nolan sat beside her with a translation panel and a notebook that was paper, actual paper, which Garvel found oddly moving. She was younger than the Admiral by a significant margin. She had the posture of someone containing a great deal of energy through visible effort. In the corner, by the wall, was the soldier. Garvel noticed him immediately and could not stop noticing him. He was not large by human standards, as far as Garvel could judge. He was not visibly armed. He was simply standing, weight slightly forward, and watching the room the way a person watches something they expect to need to respond to. His name, Garvel learned later, was Ethan Cole. He was Iris Vance's security detail. He had not been introduced. He did not introduce himself. He stood by the wall for the entire meeting and did not speak and somehow still managed to be the most present person in the room. Garvel asked his questions. He had written them in advance, in order, because he was someone who believed in order, especially when everything around him was not orderly. How long have humans had faster-than-light travel? 61 years. He took a moment with that. 61 years. The Velhari had needed 200 to refine their drive systems to the point of reliable use. 61. Why had humans never made contact with the convergence? Vera Nolan translated the Admiral's answer carefully. She spoke and then stopped and then looked at her own notebook and then continued. Garvel understood this to mean the answer was something that required precision. Humans had made contact attempts, beginning approximately 40 years ago. Long-range probes. Signal broadcasts on multiple frequencies. Survey missions to the edge of known convergence space. The Convergence's automated monitoring network had received these signals and these probes. The network had assessed them as background noise. An atmospheric reading, a sensor ghost, a drift signal with no origin worth logging. The probes had been filtered out. Garvel sat with this for a long moment. Vera was watching him carefully. He had the sensation of standing in a room and suddenly understanding that the walls were much thinner than he had built them to be. He asked, "How large is human military capacity?" Vance pushed a data card across the table. Garvel picked it up. His translation panel processed the figures. The numbers came through. His translation panel flagged them as a possible unit conversion error and asked him to verify. He verified. They were not a unit conversion error. He set the card down and did not pick it up again. He looked at the table surface for a moment, which was a convergence habit when processing information that changed the shape of things. 11 ships had broken a Ralith assault fleet. 11. The number on the card said there were significantly more than 11. He looked up. Iris Vance was drinking her coffee. She was watching him over the rim of it. She knew what he had just understood. She did not perform any reaction to his understanding. She simply let it sit in the room between them. Garvel asked his last question. It was the one he had almost not written down, because it was not a strategic question. It was something else. Why did you not come sooner?
Vera translated.
Garvel watched Vance's expression when she heard it. Something moved across her face that was gone before he could name it. Vance spoke. Short. Direct. Vera translated. We didn't know you needed us. Your catalog had us filed under extinct. We weren't in your emergency contact list. The room was quiet. We are now, Vance added. Garvel looked at his data card. He looked at the blurry image he had pulled on his personal screen before the meeting, because he had needed to look at it one more time. The blue-green world. 300 years in a dormant file. 300 years of survey probes filtered out as noise. 300 years of a species reaching toward the rest of the galaxy and being, without intention, without malice, completely ignored. He stood to leave. He stopped at the door. He turned back and looked at the soldier against the wall. The one who had not spoken. The one who had not moved. The one who had been watching every corner of the room for 40 minutes with a patient. Complete attention of someone who understood that any room could become dangerous. He spoke to Vera. What is his function here? Vera glanced at Cole. He keeps her alive. Garvel looked at Cole. One person. One soldier standing by a wall. He looked at Vance, who commanded a strike group and carried a data card with numbers that changed everything Garvel thought he knew about the balance of the galaxy. Just him? He asked. Vera's mouth made a small upward movement. Today, yeah. Just him. Garvel left. In the corridor outside the meeting room he stopped walking. He stood between two stretches of grey wall and counted his own heartbeats until they became reasonable again. He had spent his career building structure around unknowns. Filing them. Categorizing them. Making sure that everything in the galaxy that mattered had a record and a classification and a place in the Convergence's understanding of what existed. The catalog was not just a database. It was the framework through which the Convergence navigated reality. The catalog had been wrong. Not about a small thing. Not about a footnote. Wrong about a species that had had faster-than-light travel for 61 years, that had built a military capacity that made the Convergence's current war situation look different, that had been trying to say hello for 4 decades while the Convergence's systems quietly classified their voice as static. He started walking again. Slowly. He was already thinking about what else might be in the dormant files. Back in the meeting room, Vera Nolan opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote at the top, Human Idiom, Session 1. She wrote down several phrases she had heard from Vance and Cole and the other humans she had encountered since boarding. She translated them as accurately as she could. Several of them did not translate at all. She left space next to those. She looked at the space for a while. Then she wrote, in very small letters, in the margin, the catalog had them filed under extinct. They didn't seem to know. The first formal complaint arrived on Garvel's desk 36 hours after the humans were integrated into the Convergence's defensive command structure. The complaint was from a Velhari battalion commander named Orithsev. It was 3 pages long, carefully written, and described in precise detail how a human unit under a sergeant named Ethan Colhad, during a joint defensive action at the Karath 7 perimeter, refused to cede a forward position on the standard Convergence withdrawal timeline, held the position for 19 additional minutes against superior Ralith numbers, and taken no losses while doing so. Orithsev's complaint was that this had violated Convergence Tactical Protocol 72, which governed the timing of voluntary position withdrawal. Garvel read it twice. He put it in a file. He did not act on it. 5 more complaints arrived over the next 4 days. He read each one. He filed each one. They all had the same shape, human units holding positions the Convergence Protocol said to give up, doing it without permission, succeeding. He filed them. He looked at the tactical map. He looked at the positions marked in the color his system had assigned to human units. A rust red that showed up against Convergence blew the way a fire shows up against a night sky. He looked at which positions had held. He filed the complaints and said nothing. Week 1 moved through the way the first week of anything hard moves, not cleanly. The Convergence soldiers and the human soldiers were learning to operate together, which meant they were learning that they did not operate the same way at all. The Convergence doctrine was built around minimizing casualties by trading space for time. The human doctrine seemed to be built around not trading anything if it could be avoided. These 2 approaches created friction in every joint operation. And yet the positions held. In week 2, the Ralith changed their approach. Garvel noticed it on the tactical display first. The Ralith assault patterns were shifting, becoming less predictable. They had been fighting the convergence for long enough that their strategy was partly automated, built on 3 centuries of learning how the known species fought. Humans were not in that learning. Humans were outside everything the R'aletha's predictive systems were calibrated for. Private Dex Arriaga explained this to Vera Nolan during a resupply pause between a second moon position and the main Carith 7 defensive arc. He was 22 years old and he was eating something from a sealed pack with the focused attention of someone who had not eaten in a long time. "It's like," he said, searching for the words, "they studied the game really hard. Read every book about it. Memorized all the theory." He squeezed the sealed pack. But they never actually played against someone who hadn't read the same books. Vera wrote it down. She was writing everything down. She had 3 notebooks now. They were full of human phrases, human idioms, tactical vocabulary, names for things that had no convergence equivalent. She wrote in the margins of tactical maps when there was no notebook available. She was building something, a record, a bridge, a way for the convergence to understand what had arrived in their war, and she was doing it in the same continuous, slightly frantic way that a person bails out a sinking boat, because stopping felt like the worst option. Dex finished eating. He looked at the second moon through the transport window, grey and airless and scarred from 6 weeks of weapons fire. "You think we are going to hold it?" he asked. "Yes," Vera said. She said it without thinking. She meant it without thinking. She looked at what she had written in her notebooks, all the phrases and habits and approaches she had been recording for 6 weeks, and she understood that she believed it the way she believed in gravity, not because she was told to, but because the evidence was everywhere and constant. Dex nodded. He looked out the window again. He was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet, which was the quiet of someone who was about to say something funny. This quiet was something else. She did not ask about it. Week 3 arrived with a new weapon. The R'aleth deployed it at the forward position on the second moon, a disruptor that worked at the molecular level, specifically calibrated against convergent shielding systems. It was the most sophisticated thing the R'aleth had produced in the entire war. It dissolved convergence shielding on contact and left the ships behind it open. The human vessels at that position did not use convergent shielding. They held the position anyway. They held it with hull armor and angles and a speed of tactical decision-making that Garvel, watching from the command vessel, found difficult to process in real time. He watched Cole's unit operate. He watched them read a situation that was changing every 30 seconds and respond to each change without pause, without apparent hesitation, the way a body responds to being cold, not by deciding to shiver, but by shivering. Cole brought 11 soldiers off that moon. He had brought 14 in. He filed his after-action report. Garvel read it. It was short, precise, listed the tactical sequence, the positions held and lost, the equipment status of the remaining unit. At the end, it listed the 3 names. Just the names, no commentary. Cole sat outside the medical bay for an hour after filing it. Garvel was told this by a junior logistics officer who passed through that corridor. He did not go to see Cole. There was nothing he could offer that would fit inside that hour. Weeks 4, 5, and 6. The line held. It did not hold cleanly. It held the way anything holds when it is under sustained pressure, by bending slightly and not breaking. The R'aleth pushed every day. Every day, the rust-red markers on Garvel's tactical display held their positions. Some of them moved. None of them disappeared. The display had changed entirely from what it looked like at the start. Convergence blue filled the interior of the defensive arc, rust red lined the edge of it, the entire eastern frontier, position after position after position. It looked like the line had been set on fire and refused to burn. In the command chamber, Orithsev looked at the display and said nothing about Tactical Protocol 72. He had stopped filing complaints in week 2. At the end of week 6, Vera found Dex Arriaga sitting outside the medical bay. She sat down next to him. She had learned that sitting down next to a person was sometimes better than asking them anything. After a long time, he spoke. "I used to think it was going to be like, the big thing. You know." He looked at the corridor wall. "Us out here. Saving the galaxy. The big moment." Vera said nothing. "I didn't know it was going to cost this much," he said. She sat with him for another 20 minutes. Then she went back to her notebook. At the top of the page she wrote, D. Arriaga. Week 6. The cost of the big thing. She left space below it. A full half page of empty lines. She was not sure yet what needed to go there. She thought she might find out. She thought the finding out was probably going to be the hardest part. On the tactical display, the eastern line held. Rust red. Every position. Holding. The ceasefire terms were read aloud in the Convergence Grand Chamber, and the reading took 40 minutes, and the whole time Garvell stood at the main podium and kept his voice level and did not think about the casualty numbers from 3 months ago, or the 14 cycles he had projected on a screen in the same room while everyone went quiet. The Raleth seeded the Kareth systems. 2 adjacent systems along the eastern arc. A monitored border. A trade framework that would take a generation to actually function. It was more than the Convergence had expected to get. In some of the early projections, it was more than the Convergence had expected to still be in a position to ask for. He read every line. He did not skip anything, because these things mattered and deserved to be said fully and in front of everyone who had come to hear them. When he finished, the chamber held a silence that was different from the silence of 3 months ago. That silence had been the silence of people who had run out of options. This one was something else. It was the silence of people who had not expected to still be here and did not quite know yet how to hold the fact that they were. Garvell stepped back from the podium. Admiral Iris Vance had not come. She had sent a representative, and her representative was standing near the rear of the chamber in a dress uniform that was considerably less decorated than the Convergence formal dress filling the front rows, and was watching the proceedings with his hands behind his back and his weight slightly forward. Ethan Cole had been standing in the same position for the last hour. Garvell caught his eye once across the chamber. Cole gave a single small nod. Nothing else. It was enough. After the formal session, Vera Nolan stood at the front of the Convergence Cultural Archives reception hall and delivered an address that she had been writing and rewriting for 3 weeks. She had shown early drafts to Cole, who had read them without expression and said they were good. She had shown a later draft to Dex Arriaga, who had read it and then gone very quiet and then said, "Yeah," in the way that meant more than the word itself. She spoke for 20 minutes. She talked about the history of Earth, compressed and careful. 300 years of a species that had looked up at the sky and understood, slowly and then all at once, that it was not an empty sky. That the stars had neighbors. That the galaxy was full of other voices. She talked about the probes. The broadcasts. 40 years of reaching outward on every frequency the Convergence's monitoring network was supposed to be watching. She gave the number, not as an accusation, but as a fact, a real fact that deserved to be real in the room. The number of survey probes launched between 2089 and 2150 that had reached convergent space and been classified as sensor noise. Her voice caught once. Only once. Then it steadied. She did not say, "You should have listened." She did not say 300 years. She said the number and let it sit and moved on, because she had learned that some things are strongest when they are not explained. Garvell sat in the front row and listened, and understood that what she was giving the archive was not a history lecture. It was a correction. Gentle, precise, and permanent. Dex Arriaga went home. He boarded a transport at the Kareth 7 station 2 days after the ceasefire ratification. He had a bag and a jacket and the specific lightness of a person who has put down something very heavy and is still figuring out what their hands do now. He found a window seat. He watched the Kareth 7 system pull away behind the glass as the transport accelerated. The 2 moons, the grey one and the scarred one, the debris field near the inner belt from week 3 that was still slowly spreading, would be spreading for years. He watched until it was gone. He did not look like someone who had won something. He looked like someone who was bringing the cost of something home with him, in the place behind his eyes where certain things live once they are there. He was 22 years old and he looked, in that moment, about 45. The transport went to jump. The stars streaked. He closed his eyes. Garvell finished the catalogue entry. He had been working on it for weeks, starting from his office the night after the meeting on the relentless shore, building it piece by piece from everything he had observed and everything Vera had recorded and everything the joint tactical logs had produced. It was the longest entry in the Convergence archive by a significant margin. Not because humans were the most complex species he had encountered, though they were, arguably, in the running, but because every time he thought he had the right word, he would look at another log entry or another piece of Vera's translated field notes, and the word would become slightly wrong. They were precise about the things that mattered and careless about the things that did not, in ways that did not always match what other species considered important. They could hold enormous grief and go on functioning. They could hold enormous anger and aim it. They built things out of whatever was available and then decided later if the thing they had built was what they needed. They sent probes into the dark for 40 years and did not stop. He kept writing. He kept every word he was not sure about, because wrong words in the right direction were better than nothing, and the file had been nothing for 300 years. He described Iris Vance. Steady and without decoration and correct. He described Cole, who stood in rooms like rooms could become dangerous, and was usually right. He described Vera Nolan, who wrote in the margins of tactical maps in the middle of firefights because she had decided that not recording it would be worse. He described Dex Arriaga, who had gone in laughing and come out carrying something in that space behind his eyes, and who had taken a window seat on a transport home to watch a system that had cost him things he had not agreed to pay. He wrote it all down. He reached the last line. He typed, classify as spacefaring, advanced, combat capable, present. He looked at it. He added, do not file dormant. He saved the entry. He sat back in his chair. Through the window of his office he could see the docking bay where the convergence vessels were running their post-ceasefire maintenance cycles, and beyond them, just visible at the edge of the window frame, the angular shape of one human ship still moored to the station. It looked nothing like any vessel in the catalogue. It was still faintly wrong to his eye in a way he thought he might never fully adjust to. Too asymmetrical. Too angular. Built like something that had learned to be hard to read on purpose. He had spent his career trusting the catalogue. The catalogue had filed them under extinct. He looked at the angular ship in the edge of his window and understood, with the particular settled clarity of a thing that is finished, that the catalogue was not the galaxy. The galaxy was larger and stranger and full of things that did not announce themselves, and the only honest response to that was to keep the file open. Always. All of them. Every dormant record, every ghost entry, every blurry spectrographic image of a blue-green world that might be dead or might be something else. He pulled up the full catalogue on his screen. He opened the dormant files. He began reading. On the bridge of the ECS Relentless Shore, alone, in the hour after the ratification signal came through, Iris Vance stood at the forward viewport with a cup of coffee and looked at the stars. Cole came in. He stood beside her. He did not speak. Outside, the eastern frontier. The line they had come to hold. Holding still. She drank her coffee. The stars were the same stars they had always been. The same ones that had looked down at Earth for 300 years while Earth looked back up, reaching, sending probes, broadcasting on every frequency they had. The galaxy had not answered. Then it did. Then they came. She looked at the stars for a long time. Cole stood beside her and said nothing, which was the right thing, because there was nothing to say that was as true as the silence of two people standing at a window, watching a frontier that held. The coffee went cold. She drank it anyway.